Yo, it's done, your top 100 Overwatch player, and here is a tier list for the Season 3 support meta. So I'm going to run through and talk about the balance changes the support's got, and then talk about how strong they are now based off of that, and then based on the other characters that are coming in and out of the meta. Alright, starting off, we have Ana, who actually did get a little bit of a nerf on her nade duration from 4 seconds to 3.5 seconds. It's not really that substantial of a nerf overall, as she's still generally going to be able to do with her nade what she was trying to do anyway, but it does make her a little bit weaker. Regardless of that though, she's still very, very strong. So, what makes her strong is something that most people won't really consider as much, just because they're so focused on her anti-nade. And they think, oh, well, Ana can't really hit her anti-nades anymore because Kiriko's in the game consistently, so she's not that good. But that was just an added benefit to Ana. What really, really makes her strong are other things. Particularly, she has amazing survivability. So, her survivability is in her nade and her sleep dart. Her nade gives her a huge chunk of HP, obviously, but then gives her 50% extra HP gained from healing abilities on herself and the allies that she hits. So, as you climb higher up the ladder, the way to do it as a support, a lot of it is just to peel your other support, right? So if you're on Lucio, you make sure your Ana isn't getting killed. Whatever it may be, you are constantly healing them, and when you're having Ana doing that, she's just throwing this nade into herself, and she gets so much HP healing from her teammates that she can't really die, right? That is included also with her stun on her sleep dart. So if you're hitting the sleep dart and then saving your nade and then popping it on yourself consistently, you just don't really ever die as Ana, right? And if you do hit sleep darts decently, particularly if you hit it on like a Winston, for example, there's a high chance that they're just going to die, right? And Winston is kind of your biggest enemy. There's also something like Diva or Wrecking Ball to dive you, and then there's, you know, damage characters like Genji and Tracer, but those can be kind of pushed off with the nade, and the sleep dart landed on the ball or the Diva is a lot easier to do, right? So you're still just really, really hard to kill. Too hard to kill, honestly. That, in addition to the nade being an excellent ability to just peel a teammate with that burst of HP and then extra healing afterwards, and in general, just top tier healing. Ana can throw healing at any range consistently and put a lot into somebody, which again is bolstered by that nade, right? But in addition to that, she has an extremely powerful ultimate that is just crazy good, right? Nano Boost is kind of wild. Now, you're not going to be really like throwing it onto Genji as much nowadays, because Genji isn't really going to be as played that often in Season 3, but you're going to see it thrown onto the tank meta picks, 2 of them, which are going to be Winston and Ramattra. Obviously, you toss that on the Winston, he jumps in, gets a lot of kills, farms his primal, and you win the game, right? Then with Ramattra, it's the same thing. You pop it on him as he's running into the enemy team, and it's really easy for him to get a lot of kills. I am a tank player by trade, and it's really fun to get those, so yeah, guys, play on and put those onto me, please. And like I said, people will detract against Ana because she's not Kiriko, essentially, and that's the reason why she's not going to be the very, very top tier. But situationally, if you are playing with a good Winston player, you are playing with a good Ramattra player, or like I said, maybe even a Genji player, Ana is still a very, very viable pick. And if you're basing what you're playing based on your teammates, playing Ana to do that, to synergize well and get a lot of value out of that, is a very, very, very good choice overall. So Ana is going to be put into a little bit towards high be my duo woo category. I guess you guys can probably see why I named it that. Alright, so for Brigitte, she does actually get some changes to the way her health pack works. Instead of it being 55 HP per second for 2 seconds, it is now 50 HP per second for 2 seconds. That's a 10 HP nerf overall, but to counteract that, it now gives a 25 HP instantaneous burst when it hits a target. So we're looking at 15 extra HP and that nice little burst that can help top up a target to keep them from dying. So that was the first buff, and the second one was an ultimate cost reduction by 10%. Now these changes do seem decent overall, but they're not really going to change the position she has in Overwatch 2, which, considering how dominant and crazy and powerful she was in Overwatch 1, that honestly might be for the best. But the problem with her is that the role she fills is filled better by Lucio. What she did in Overwatch 1 that kept her meta forever was that she played as a second support to protect the other one and basically make them undiveable. And then in addition to that, having a crazy powerful ultimate, basically, to put it in very simple terms. But with Overwatch 1, she got nerfed into Overwatch 2, with her ultimate no longer giving that armor, and then her bash no longer stunning. So she doesn't threaten targets as much, and now she essentially is the weak link. So when you dive into a team, there isn't this big scary demon of death, Brigitte, that you just can't do anything about now. Now she really is what you're trying to go for. And considering I play a lot of Winston and I dive into Brigitte, as soon as you get past that whip shot, she's kind of free to kill. And that's not something that you can really have to reliably protect and take care of your other support. Whereas with Lucio, that's a lot harder to do. His self-healing is better, his boop is a lot better, his movement is a lot better, and his ultimate is relatively similar to Brigitte's. And so you're just looking at a character that can just do what Brigitte used to do a lot better than what Brigitte does now, right? And so with that and her being the weak link and not being able to do what she really needs to do and what would make her meta, there's that. And the other issue is just that she doesn't really synergize with tanks better than other characters do. So again, with Lucio in particular, if you're playing with like a Reinhardt, an Orisa, a Ramatra, you can speed them in towards the enemy or speed them out when they're getting pressured too much. With Brigitte, I mean, yeah, I guess she can run in and slap a target around like the same way Reinhardt can, but she's not actually facilitating him really in any way like Lucio can. So you're looking at a character that just is the weak link now, doesn't have that ability to protect the other character, and doesn't synergize with the tanks like other characters do. So with that, we're putting Brigitte in the very low, I'm judging you if you pick Brigitte category. So considering we talked about Lucio just now and how great he is, he's probably getting some nerfs, right? Well, actually, no. His sound barrier cost was reduced by 7%, which is kind of a pretty solid buff for him. As we mentioned before, we have this Lucio that's a very strong character and has two core purposes. The first one is to control the flow of a game essentially by either speeding in aggressive brawlers or speeding his team out when they're getting pressured too hard. So that was the first one. The second one is countering dive characters, like countering a Winston, pushing out tracers that get too aggressive, and protecting his other support player. Now the reason that's relevant to our conversation here is because the characters that Lucio facilitates or counters are getting a lot stronger in the meta, particularly the tanks, right? So you have Winston, who is a lot stronger now because Roadhog isn't as strong, and people just have this perception that he's terrible and will absolutely not really be playing him at all. So Winston can now be countered to some extent by Lucio, right? Him just staying there with his Ana or his Kiriko or whatever and just being annoying, pushing him off a little bit, stopping his jump momentum, and then healing up his extra support there. And then on the other side of things, you have him playing with an Orisa, playing with a Ramatra, who are both really, really viable to be sped into enemies and pushed into them. Particularly like if your Ramatra gets a nano, it's even better to have your Lucio speeding him in, and that's kind of a one fight, right, in a lot of situations. So Lucio is getting heavy indirect buffs because of the way the meta is running, even though he was already strong. And on top of that, he just got this nice little sound barrier buff. Also, Lucio does this interesting little thing that what you used to have a off tank doing. You used to have an off tank character like a diva playing with a Reinhardt who would fly off on the edges and take care of weird things going on, like a tracer flanking or like an Ashe standing on the high ground. And now you have a Lucio who can kind of do that because you don't have the off tank anymore. So even when you're playing with like a Reinhardt or something like that, or like I said, a Ramatra or whatever, if there is that tracer flanking, you can poke her out a little bit and then just give her one little annoying boop as she tries to go in on your Ana or your other whatever support you're playing with, and then you can just go and run up on the walls and push out like a sniper on a high ground. There's a lot of useful things you can do with Lucio. And so because of all this, because of him being strong, because of the buffs, all that, he is also getting into the very high Be My Duo Uwu category. With Mercy, we have some changes that are pretty contentious overall, I would say. I know a lot of you probably aren't happy about that, but I think it's quite a nerf to her flexibility, which is a really, really big deal in Overwatch. So we'll just talk about that. All right. Guardian Angel cooldown was nerfed from 1.5 seconds to 2.5 seconds. That's a big issue, and honestly, the most substantial change in this whole thing. I know it seems like it's not that big of a deal with extra second, you know, like whatever, it's just 1 second, right? But not really. That 1 second is 90 extra damage from a Winston zapping you for that second, and then a punch before you go away. It's a full extra half magazine from a tracer. It's just that much longer you're taking damage unnecessarily that you wouldn't have been taking before. Before, Mercy was like nigh unkillable in most situations, but she's not like that anymore. Particularly against the characters that really, really want to kill her, like that Winston and that tracer. So that's a pretty hefty nerf. If you ever make a mistake of just flying a little bit too far, a little bit frivolously, and then like a tracer pulls up, like I said, then you're risking dying in that situation. And her flight is no longer just this cooldown you can just use willy-nilly. Now it really has to be thought of as like a jump cooldown, like on Winston or Doomfist or whoever. So her backward Guardian Angel jump was reduced by 20%. This is like the least important change. It makes her a little bit less quick but if you're playing on PC, you could just turn around and use it directly forward anyway, and that doesn't make it any different at all, so it's not an issue. Her healing changes are a big deal though. Her healing was reduced from 55 to 45, but she now gets 50% more when she's healing targets that are below 50% HP. So that 45 becomes 67.5, which is a lot, to be honest, particularly when it's just very consistent and will always be there. She lost her passive that gave her 50% of the extra 50% more of the standard support passive healing from 15 to 22 per second. She lost that, and now she just gets 25% of the healing that she does with her regular healing staff. That may seem like a really big buff to her because she's able to heal herself like constantly by healing targets, but what people don't really think about is how consistently that's going to be happening. For example, if you're playing with a Pharah, which is something that happens a lot with Mercy, and the enemies don't choose to shoot the Pharah, you aren't going to be healing yourself. And so that, with the extra second you have to wait between flights, you're going to be taking a lot more damage. Whereas before, you were going to be regenerating a little bit of extra HP in that process, you're not going to be doing that now. But that's not even the really biggest deal with this passive change. The issue is when she was using her ultimate before, she would regen that 22 HP per second. Now she doesn't. She doesn't get anything unless she's healing a target. But again, if whatever target she's healing, or if she's damage boosting, she's not healing herself. So that's just extra damage she's taking, extra damage she's not able to regen off of her, and if she's being chased around by targets, she's way easier to kill. And she also can't use it as a sort of like, oh no, I'm low, time to dip and just be full HP, essentially, right? Because if she uses it, she has to be making sure she's on something to be healing them. And now she has to think about healing in terms of using her target to get HP off of them, rather than using it to support them. So putting this together, Mercy is just a much less reliable pick. Yes, the healing changes are substantial, but the real modification with this is the fact that she can't survive against divers as well. So whereas before, if you were playing against a Winston or a Tracer or a Ball, whatever, it wasn't really that big of a deal. Whereas now, you have to be thinking constantly about how you're using your Guardian Angel, thinking about who you're healing, all that sort of stuff. And it's to the extent where it isn't justifiably viable all the time. I played Winston all the time into Mercy, and it was miserable and like impossible before. Now it's not a problem. It's drastically different. And so if you're playing against someone who's a diver and who's good at their character, Mercy just might not be the pick anymore, especially when you can play something like Lucio or Kiriko or even Moira that just won't have that chance of dying as much. It isn't so substantial that Mercy is like an absolute crap pick now. She definitely is still powerful, but it's not this like ever-present, oh, just pick her with Kiriko and you win the game sort of viability that she used to have. And so she's definitely lowering a little bit because of that. So instead of being like S tier like she was before, Mercy is now getting dropped into high. If we lose, I'll flame you when you're playing against a diver. If you're not playing against a diver though, this does change. Like I said, because of the way the diving situation works, she's vulnerable, and so she might not be the best pick. But if you're not playing against divers, then this isn't as much of a problem, and she's still similarly as powerful as she was before. Potentially more powerful, just because of the way that her Valkyrie can give an absolute bunch of HP, and the fact that she is now better able to top up targets that are lower than 50% HP, she definitely is way more viable in that. So if you have no threat of being dope whatsoever, then yeah, go ahead and play Mercy. And we have no problems, and she's high. But if they do, then you gotta be careful. Moving on to Moira, we have a character who had a 5% reduction in her ultimate charge cost. It's a decent buff, but the issue is that it doesn't change her position in the meta at all, which is just to not be in the meta in the first place. The reason for that is because her role as a support that's supposed to be very hard to kill and costs a lot for the enemy to go and chase her down and kill her, she had that replaced and taken away from her by Kiriko. And in addition to Kiriko taking that position away from her, she also just does so many more things better with her team utility of her Suzu and her ultimate. So maybe this isn't so much a problem with Moira being bad, but Kiriko just being crazy good. And honestly, not having the right to be in the game in the first place. But having said this, Moira's real true strength is her ability to just pump a lot of healing into her team while surviving decently. Her healing orb does an insane amount of healing if used properly and bounced in certain areas, along with just her large chunks of healing being tossed into her teammates. Now, regardless of this all, Moira doesn't really synergize with her team as well as some other characters do, mainly because her core specialty is just that healing. Whereas if you're playing with like a Kiriko as a tank, you know that if you get slept, if you get anti whatever, you have someone to save you. With Moira, you don't. And in a complex game like Overwatch has increasingly been becoming, that puts Moira lower and lower in the tier. But you can still get a good effect out of Moira if you're good at the character and you know how to use her properly. So play her responsibly, play her consistently. You'll probably have some people getting mad at you, to be honest, but you can still get good value out of her. So we're gonna put Moira in the medium to lower, more like lower. If we lose, I'll flame you, because yes, as much as he's solid, there are better characters to play. As for Zenyatta, he had to change his ammo count from 20 to 25. This is going to let him consistently deal more damage over time, but not let him into the meta because that wasn't the problem that he had originally. The problem with Zenyatta is that he has a very, very particular set of necessities to be meta. He needs to have a support character that can make up for his lack of healing, considering he doesn't heal that much, and then you need characters that can protect him well. In Overwatch 1, this character was fully wrapped up in Brigitte, because Brigitte was able to protect him with her whip shot and her bash and her ultimate armor, but also able to consistently heal enough to the rest of the team to justify having Zenyatta, and then justify having Zenyatta for his damage. But that is not in the game right now because Brigitte was nerfed. Her armor was nerfed and she can no longer stun. So she isn't able to protect Zenyatta enough from the people that would try and kill him, so you don't play her at all. Now, you do have a replacement for Brigitte, which is Lucio. And while Lucio's healing is good enough to like be saved to amp on a Lucio and then, or to amp on the Zenyatta and then boop an enemy away to protect him, but his healing isn't good enough to justify Zenyatta's low healing. So you can't use Lucio to like support a whole team while Zenyatta just supports one player. And because of that, you're just not going to see Zenyatta in the meta at all. He's still okay because we're talking in this sort of like a, not even ideal perspective, like a moderately ideal perspective, because when the game goes in like your average rank, like Zenyatta's still going to struggle. But if you're playing against any sort of divers, if you're playing with a support that doesn't have a lot of healing, you can't really play Zenyatta. And so because of this, we're going to be putting Zenyatta pretty low down here in the low I'm judging you category if you play him. He's very vulnerable overall, just because he doesn't synergize with tanks very well like some other characters do, and because he really, really needs that particular situation. But if you are good at Zenyatta and you're good at clicking on heads, and you're playing in a situation where you don't have to worry about one of those problems, like for example, you're playing with an Ana or something that can do a lot of healing, and they don't have any divers, then go ahead and play him. And you're not having to deal with the situation of them not, you don't have to worry about the healing, and then you also don't have to worry about being dove, right? In a situation like that, then go ahead and play Zenyatta. But considering people can swap and retain ult charge, and they will swap to target you, Zenyatta's just not really the pick right now. Now to talk about Baptiste, he didn't get any balance changes overall, and partially because of that, he's going to be staying generally in the same sort of area he was before, which is just kind of being okay. He's in a very similar situation to Moira, where if you're skilled at him and some of the situations you're playing in are good, you can go ahead and play him, but he's not an incredible choice. He has some of the fundamental similarities to Kiriko, why you'd want to play him, which is his lamp and solid healing. But the thing about that is Suzu is just a better version of lamp essentially, because it also stops cooldowns if you're in stuns. So if you throw a lamp on top of your slept Reinhardt, it doesn't help him. But if you do it with a Suzu, then he walks off and continues slamming people with his hammer. So that's kind of the issue with Baptiste. Like I said, similar situation to Moira, where there's just a character that's doing what he's supposed to do better. And in addition to the fact that Kiriko does a better thing with her Suzu than Baptiste does with his lamp, Kiriko has better survivability also. And in this game of Overwatch that's getting even more and more complex, the more things that you can do solidly, the better your character is, which is why you're seeing a character like Kiriko that can do so many things consistently, be very, very, very powerful. So again, with Baptiste, he's not horrible, it's just there's better characters. So if you're good at him, then go have fun. If you need to go click on a Pharah Mercy that's flying around in the sky, then yeah, go ahead and go Baptiste. If you're trying to deadlift your game by clicking on heads and you're playing quick play or whatever, then have fun, right? But if you're going for your maximum comp rank, then you're gonna have a better chance playing some other characters like Ana if you're trying to just deal larger amounts of healing, and Kiriko if you're just trying to support your team. So that's going to get us putting him into the if I lose, we flame category, right next to Moira and Mercy. And last we have Kiriko, our permanently meta queen, who will probably always be meta and will continue to be meta because they didn't do any nerfs to her in this last patch. Now, before that, the patch before, they did an 18% nerf to her overall healing, which was decently substantial. But the problem with that is that wasn't really what was keeping her meta. Yes, she does decent healing, but we're not picking her because she heals. We're picking her because of her crazy utility that she has. She has an insane ability to survive being attacked, and she importantly has an amazing ultimate that does massive buffs to everything for her team, her whole team. But most importantly, she has her Suzu that basically just lets her erase any bad thing that's happened to any of her teammates consistently throughout the match. Now, again, I don't really know if I even need to say that much about Kiriko. She's insane. The healing nerfs weren't enough to stop her. She's extremely good in most situations. She has good enough healing to justify picking her as a main healer, and she has the ability to just dip whenever she's being attacked, the ability to save targets. If you're really trying to climb in Overwatch 2 as a support, then just play Kiriko. Even if you're not just landing your damage consistently, which isn't what her main focus is anyway, you don't have to be crazy like mechanical on her either. All you need to do is just understand when you need to use your Suzu and just do it, really. And then pop that along the enemy team when your team's there, and then stonks go up. So Kiriko is being put into the win on load-in screen because, yeah, it'll definitely increase your chances of winning on the load-on screen if you play her. Thanks so much for watching, and if I helped you out with this video, then help me out by hitting a subscribe. Thanks, guys.